What is up everyone, it's Saber here and welcome to another Naruto What If. If you end up liking the video, please consider subscribing. It's free and you can take it back at any time and it really helps me out, and this is my third channel, so if you want some more what ifs, go check out my other channels. And with all of the YouTube formalities out of the way, let's get into it. The world had only seen these eyes twice before, and each time the world feared their wielder. With these eyes the mountains would move when told to move, with these eyes the waters would part when told to part, with these eyes the gods themselves shook in fear. All these things were true when these eyes gazed upon the mortal world. Naruto opened his eyes. The occupants of the room stood there, shock written all over their faces, their minds a jumbled mess. Silence. The Rinnegan, the Samsara eyes, were said to be the greatest of all dojutsu, the most powerful eyes to ever exist. This, however, was not the case. What trickery is this? Michi, a man Naruto began to believe was good for nothing but annoying him, shouted, staring back at the self-proclaimed kings of the country. A Rinnegan with 9 tomo sitting on its rings, 3 per ripple, held amusement. Uchiha Itachi is my friend and I need to be taught how to use the Sharingan. His voice held his amusement, but just barely. The Rinne Sharingan had returned, and they obeyed Uzumaki. Naruto, now the eyes of God, stared back at mere men, mere mortals. A true king was amongst the peasants, not that he saw it as that he was just a man, a boy, a virtually indestructible, immortal, omnipotent man, but a man nonetheless. The devil's hands have been busy, the daimyo whispered, his entire body feeling numb at seeing what was it he was seeing. That is my condition, Hokage-sama. Naruto continued. Uchiha Itachi, no one else having to learn how to use the Sharingan was a little white lie that was necessary, but it still was something that he very much disliked. He was a man of his word. Lying and secrecy was an annoying fact of life in this era, a fact that even he could not avoid. He was doing it for the betterment of the world, of his children and family, but it still made him uncomfortable that he was apparently good enough to lie straight to the faces of trained shinobi. Was as disconcerting as it was comical. In his past life, his third eye held the Rinne Sharingan, and he was very capable of using its abilities, having created his son's greatest technique, but chose not to rely on them. They were not a power to be used without caution. He was a firm believer that abuse of power led to arrogance and the downfall of more humans than he was willing to admit. Hiruzen gulped, shaking his head to clear his mind. The eyes he was looking at, they were not of this world. Hi Naruto Koen, the Sandaime began. I agree to your terms, he signaled someone unknown with his left hand, his fingers forming strange signs. In less than 2 seconds, in a blink of an eye, someone from the zoo was at the aged man's side as he began to speak with the operative silently. The blonde let the tomo that sat on the rings of his Rinnegan fade, not needing those eyes. Those eyes, they were meant for domination, absolute, inescapable world domination. A chill ran down his back and his heart suddenly felt heavy. He might have to use those eyes for this incorrigible shinobi world, and that was almost too much weight for his already heavy shoulders. The way things were looking, absolute subjugation through massive amounts of subterfuge and, for lack of a better word, bullying, was the only way to save the world from its worst enemy, humanity. Naruto panted. His small child body was not used to such physical workouts. Itachi was currently pushing his body to the absolute limits. If he wasn't a Jinchuriki and an Uzumaki to boot, which apparently made him an endurance monster, he probably would have collapsed by now from fatigue. Taijutsu was what this era dubbed martial arts, or the optimization of natural human abilities by accessing one's physical and mental energies, which relied heavily on stamina and strength gained through vigorous training. One could execute body techniques. Naruto had never really trained his previous body in martial arts, not having to rely on his own body too much when it came to his battles. His eyes were always more than enough to get the job done. Itachi, however, convinced him that in a world where people could move faster than sound and demolish mountains with a single punch, he was sure that Senju Tsunade was Suki's descendant, that having knowledge and experience with taijutsu would come in handy. He was no longer in a world where the very whisper of his name sent the Shinigami himself running in fear. He was someone else in a very different world. He would have to show the world who he was, gain that incredible status. Once again that thought caused him to chuckle softly. He had sent kings fleeing, tyrants and pirates alike scurrying, and the gods themselves kept their distance. He was not an overly proud man or arrogant in any meaning of the word, but even he had to admit that he was a man both respected and feared by the entire world. It was somewhat annoying that he was seen as nothing but a child now. Well, he'd just have to remind the kings, the tyrants, the pirates and gods who he was, and why he was not a man to be trifled with. He would save the world, he would save his children, he would do all these things. He swore he was Uzumaki Naruto, the Rikudo Sennin, and he never broke his promises. So here he was practicing the god-awful kata Itachi said was perfect for him. Apparently Itachi had a sense of humor, because naming the tailor-made taijutsu the Sennin no Mai was just too much for it not to be a crack at him. Sennin-sama, Itachi suddenly said, stopping the light spar. Let's take a break. Naruto sighed, thankful for the much-needed break. He was a stamina tank, but he was still 7. He took a seat on the ground, his eyes gazing at the moon, which was slowly rising as the sun was setting. It was a beautiful sight, and Naruto decided to share it. Itachi, he began. Sit with me, little dragon. That was something he started calling Itachi little dragon. He was an Uchiha, a fire breather. They were a clan of powerful mighty dragons, their hearts ablaze with the will of fire. He's heard so much about Itachi, had spoken about the curse of hatred, something that seemed to plague the clan. Naruto had immediately dismissed that theory. There was no such thing as a curse of hatred. It wasn't possible, since even as individuals the Uchiha were the most loving people the world had ever seen. They were his descendants, and he refused to believe that his children, the Senju and Uchiha, were born with hatred. Hatred was akin to a parasite. It needed a living host, and would continue to derive nutrients at the host's expense. No, the Uchiha were not born hateful. They just had the unfortunate capability of loving with all of their hearts, not just a part of it. Once that love was lost or taken from them, love would become hate, and hate would come. If the fall of the hateful Itachi didn't move for a moment, until he gave a small smile and did as he was told. He knew what was coming. This was what the young Uchiha waited for, craved for. He loved history of any kind, and what better history was there than the history of the Rikudo Sennin? After long training sessions, Naruto would thank him with a tale that would blow the Uchiha's mind. The life of the Sage of Six Paths was by far the most amazing fable. Every memory held such importance, as every step molded the world, changed it, and with every word the blonde held his attention, every wave of his hand surprising him. Being so captured by the stories being told, the words that left the tongue of the younger boy held more value than gold, than village secrets, than everything. They were in a smaller training ground, and Uchiha owned one that only Itachi ever used. They had been there for hours already, and it had been like that since the meeting with the fire daimyo a week ago. He was becoming a shinobi, and Itachi was his personal sensei. It was uncommon for shinobi to be given this type of attention before they even became a genin, but not unheard of. Most of the times this happened, though, was through a family member who was already in the shinobi ranks. But when you possess a Rinnegan and a new form of Sharingan to boot, you got certain advantages. Yes, he was training in certain shinobi fields, but he was not going to actually become a shinobi. He would not sink into the corruption that followed said lifestyle. Itachi moved with purpose, lying down next to the person he called friend, eager to listen and listen. He did. Tsukuyami, Naruto began, was the most beautiful goddess I have ever laid eyes on. That one sentence caused the stoic calm Uchiha to shoot upright, eyes wide. Why, you met the moon goddess? He asked in shock. Naruto chuckled, his eyes closed, a look of pleasant reminiscence on his face. I didn't just meet her, my little dragon. Naruto began smirking. This would be amusing, he decided. I married her, and she mothered my children. Itachi froze. Two figures walked side by side, their long white kimonos flirting with the earth. They walked on to the right. A tall man with shoulder-length pale red hair stood, a black dual-headed shakujo in his right hand, one end with the typical ringed hoop, the other a crescent-shaped curve. His back was decorated with a large red Rinnegan-like marking with a pattern of 9 red magatama arranged in 3 rows of 3 beneath it. He walked with near hypnotizing purpose, and the very air around him seemed cleaner, purer. To the left, a similarly tall man with long white hair stood, a sheathed sword on his hip, and a shakujo in his left hand. His every step was that of a noble. The very ground under his feet almost thankful to be stepped on. The two young men walked towards the fiery sun. Their minds made they were needed in the northeast, so that's where they were headed. The two walked in the most comfortable silence, the very surrounding nature seeming to silence in their presence, not out of fear but out of respect. They wore stoic expressions, walking calmly to their destination. They had been walking before the sun began to rise, and they would most likely be walking long after it sets. There was work to be done, and it was of great importance. Suddenly they both stopped, feeling it before it actually appeared. A bright, incredibly powerful light shot down from the sky. It hit the earth and didn't disappear for a good 5 seconds. The earth was torn apart from the blast and shook from its force. The impact was hard enough to disturb the almost religious silence nature was showing the two figures as the light faded, and the silence began to return. The long-haired man spoke, his very voice carrying more elegance and nobility than 10 kings. Nii-san, it looks like they've sent another. Neither moved nor even bothered to pay attention to the form that had come from the extremely powerful light, seemingly from the heavens it would seem. So the second man sighed. He was a man of peace, and his brother was no different. Why couldn't they see that he actually looked sad, like it hurt him? The man with long white hair was the first to meet the eyes of the newcomer. Her lavender eyes met his featureless white orbs. He glanced at his brother, noticing the saddened look on his face, and narrowed his eyes, turning back to the intruder. His brother was a great man, someone who healed and asked for nothing, someone who gave and never took. He was a bringer of peace, and the fact that these arrogant, asinine, egotistical pests couldn't see that somewhat angered him. A form came from the light, a woman with light blonde hair and lavender eyes, garbed in a white kimono. Similar to theirs, she was nowhere as tall as either of them, but the aura she radiated was no less palpable, an aura of superiority the likes of which almost seemed to surpass the furious look on her otherwise breathtakingly beautiful features. Had the short-haired man most curious, she looked at him, the short-haired man, and snarled. Her lavender eyes met his purple-ringed eyes. That gave him powers he wasn't supposed to possess. He was mortal and no function but to destroy human and her people. Were not happy that such prowess was given to one so unworthy. Their horns could not fool her or her people. They were human, no matter how divine they may look. She opened her mouth to speak, and speak she did. Otsutsuki Hagoromo, the Rinnegan, is not a power mere mortals should be in possession of, she said bluntly and to the point. Forfeit what does not belong to you, or I shall make you give up what is not yours. What had transpired next happened in the blink of an eye, faster for even someone like her to not react fast enough. The white-haired man, planting his black shakujo in the ground, vanished. A loud booming noise coming from the action. He had broken the sound barrier with frightening ease. Suddenly and without warning, the horned pale-eyed man was face to face with the woman who dared to speak to his brother like a peasant, his blade poised and already swinging at her in a mighty arc. Then the most powerful man spoke, his whisper of a voice carrying more strength than 10 nations. Himura. The simple call of his brother's name was enough to stop the powerful man mid-swing. Otsutsuki Himura, still wearing his ever-stoic expression, turned his blade and instead swiped at the air to the left of the woman, and again he vanished. The moment he appeared next to his brother, Himura was already sheathing his blade before he could completely sheath it, though the woman smirked. The mighty Himura still does as he's told by his brother, who's not 5 minutes older than he. Himura did not respond to this, instead just sheathing his sword with an audible click, and with the click the mass of trees that was to the woman's left, where the man she had just mocked swung his famed sword, split like paper. Miles of forest was cut clean with a single swing. To her credit, the woman didn't show her nervousness, nothing but a bead of sweat falling from her brow, but that was enough for Himura, his eyes able to see everything from her fast heartbeat to her lungs inhaling and exhaling oxygen at a quickened pace. Good, she now knew her place. What is your name, goddess? San. Otsutsuki Hagoromo, a man of power and peace, asked. His politeness and willingness to speak was appreciated by the woman. She had obviously underestimated Himura, and that was her very first mistake. His brother, even without the Rinnegan, was a man that could even face him on equal ground, and his skill with a sword was rivaled by none. I am Tsukuyami, she replied. Hagoromo was actually surprised. He never thought he'd meet the goddess his mother named her ultimate techniques. After the reality bender, he replied smiling. It is a pleasure to meet you, Tsukuyami-san, he said as he lowered his head, a little out of respect for the beautiful woman. Even without a domain, you are highly respected both in humanity's eyes and the divine hierarchy. His powerful feared eyes met her lavender ones, a small smile on her face. No matter what her dislikes were with him, a compliment from the legendary priest was something very appreciated by anyone who was given one. Flattery will get you nowhere, Hagoromo-san. She decided to add the honorific since he was being so polite, not wanting to be shown up by a human. You will hand over those eyes. Hagoromo closed his eyes, a small smile on his face. Polite manners, not flattery, Tsukuyami-san, he replied, and I'm most curious as to why you and your people believe my eyes do not belong to me, he said. His voice was still calm and neither man showed too much emotion. Their faces ever stoic. Those eyes are divine and they do not belong to mortals. Life and death are powers that cause catastrophe when in your kind's hands, she said truthfully. Your mother is proof enough of that. Thus her second mistake. My mother does not represent all of humanity, just as you do not represent all deities. It is a narrow-minded and, to be honest, moronic way of thought. Himura answered. His family meant everything to him, more than anything else, and he would not have others judge or claim to know what they clearly did not. And I will only say this once, he continued, the veins around his eye sockets bulging. Never speak of my mother again or I'll cut your tongue out, vermin. Himura was a little overprotective. Calm brother, Hagoromo whispered, seemingly relaxing the angered man with his voice alone. But he is right, Tsukuyami-san. His eyes met hers. Leave our mother's name out of your mouth. He paused, letting the words sit before he gave her a small smile. Please, the two of you speak as if you can command me, the supposed goddess proclaimed with narrowed eyes. You are but hairless age, she snarled. Know your place. With that said, the reality bender shot off an almost purple-pink after image following her. She raised her arm and beams the same color as her after image shot from her body, rushing at the man who stole God's eyes. When the beams of pure chakra and life energy came within inches of the holy man's flesh, they suddenly stopped, only to begin shrinking, being absorbed into Hagoromo's body by the Preta path. Even the gods couldn't scar him. Tsukuyami sighed. I was hoping to do this the easy way. She shook her head. But like all humans, you can't see the bigger picture of things. She sighed again, this time dramatically. And here I thought the great priest of the six paths was a reasonable and intelligent man. Hagoromo just smiled softly at the woman. Intelligent, fairly reasonable. On occasion he chuckled softly to himself. As for this bigger picture, it's not about who can and can't see it. Himura allowed himself a small smile, already hearing this from his wise brother. It's about who can comprehend it. He smiled again. The straw that broke the camel's back, if you will. The air became heavy, the peaceful aura vanishing. Tsukuyomi's lavender eyes darkened to a deep purple, her very skin seemingly falling upwards towards the heavens, only leaving purple skin bright enough to blind some. A halo hovered over her head, almost pink hair standing resembling wings, and then the angelic form before them smiled. It was something that befitted a demon, not a divine entity. Such a foolish human to act as if he is smarter than a goddess. She started. I will have those eyes, she snarled. The eyes you used to kill my brother. The goddess in her true god form blasted off at the brothers who would later slay God. Rage-filled eyes narrowed in total righteous fury. Himura looked to his brother, a sorrowful expression on his face. The deity had just brought up one of the few things that his brother actually regretted. It broke his heart to have to do what he did, but he had to do it. It was not done lightly, but out of necessity. He had to kill the great storm of summer. He had to kill Susanoo. Instead of an angry look of denial, Tsukuyomi came face to face with a mournful one, tears falling silently to the ground. She didn't stop the second her energy-covered fist was about to make contact with his face. Hagoromo's eyes snapped onto her, the rings of his eyes almost bulging. Himura took a step back. The gods were about to duel. It was an impossible absurdity. He was not human. He couldn't be. She was sure. She panted, her sore body exhausted beyond anything she had ever felt before. She could hardly breathe. Her bones ached and her muscles screamed. She had near infinite chakra, much more than her siblings, yet she could hardly feel what was left. Was there anything left? She was alive for now, so she must have some chakra. She tried to raise her head. She just laid there, not even able to raise her own head. This was pathetic, mortifying on a level she never knew existed. A human? No, that's wrong. He was not human. He was something else, transcendent. He beat her down. He crushed her with such power she had actually been frightened by. He scared her. If she could, she would chuckle. She was proud of herself. Even without looking, she knew what was there. The surrounding as far as the eye could see, and considering who was around at the time, that was extremely far. Was scarred, flattened, raised. They probably split the country in two, maybe not that bad, but she had never seen so much destruction, so much carnage. She had lasted 3 days. She was able to stand against the great priest for 3 days. Even if she didn't even scratch his skin, she had lasted for 3 days, and that in itself to her was the only kind of victory. Anyone who fought the holy man could attain. His shadow announced him, his passive and untired face soon staring at her from above. She looked at him with something akin to acceptance. She did not fear him anymore. Why would she? There was nothing she could do. Fear was an annoyingly human emotion, so she discarded it after realizing that Otsutsuki Hagoromo was even more powerful than she. Are you going to kill me now too, like you murdered my brother? She asked in a tired voice, more of a whisper than anything. The pain that entered the Godman's eyes confused her. Tsukuyomi, the dropping of sand from her name was noticed. I did not wish to kill Susanoo. Then why did you? She screamed, not caring enough to hold the tears in anymore. You took him away from us. Hagoromo wouldn't allow his eyes to leave hers. It seemed it was time to tell her. Susanoo lost his mind when his wife was killed, he suddenly said. Tsukuyomi's eyes narrowed. He became insane, going into a killing frenzy. For 5 days he sighed at the goddess's disbelieving look. He killed thousands of people. Tsukuyomi, thousands of innocent men, women, and children lost their lives to his broken self. Liar, the goddess shouted, refusing to meet his truthful gaze. It's the truth, Himura began. Nisan, and I tried to convince him to stop, even offer him our help. The younger of the twins huffed. The fool waited for my back to be turned to strike me like a coward, he continued, not really caring about the woman's feelings. He was killed trying to take my life. He was rabid, a mindless husk of his former self. Hagoromo finally allowed himself to close his eyes, the gravity of his actions weighing on his shoulders. Susanoo loved his wife more than life itself, and when a nasty demon took her away from him, he had lost himself. He took to bloodlust, craving nothing but death. He became what he and his brother fought, what they protected mortals from. Susanoo had become a demon. Seeing the genuine expression of regret and truthfulness caused her to clench her fists. She was such a fool. She had judged too soon, jumping to conclusions before she truly knew the situation. Brother, Himura began, we need to go. Hagoromo turned to his twin, his fellow protector of the powerless. We have wasted enough time as it is. The pale-eyed Otsutsuki didn't mean to sound insensitive or arrogant, he just naturally sounded so. He carried more grace, more nobility than even Hagoromo, and if he was anything, he was blunt to a fault. Even Hagoromo sighed. His brother was right. We must be taking our leave. Tsukuyomi-san, he nodded his head. We are needed elsewhere. With that said, the brothers turned, walking away without another word. The goddess had long since taken her human form again. She just sat in the destruction caused by her foolishness, tears running down her tired face. Her brother was turned into a monster, tainted by his own hatred and sorrow, and he was cleansed from the human realm by the holy sage. Tsukuyomi cried. Very little could cause the two most powerful men in world such absolute anger, such absolute Rage that they were currently feeling. They were peaceful caring men. Their life mission to guard the sacred beauty that is life. Rage and hatred were two things that were somewhat foreign to them, but right now at this very moment they were so very livid. The wildlife ran in the opposite direction, the plants whimpering in their presence. The ground trembled and the air was heavy and thick. There was no reverence shown to them. By all things natural, only fear. They cried tears of anger. Everyone was dead. They had heard rumors of a demon rampaging across the country, leaving a trail of bodies and despair in its wake, but they didn't think that anything like this would happen. The demonic entity had only taken a handful of lives since the start of its carnage, but this was a massacre. The entirety of the small village was butchered, even the children. A small arm, that of a child, reached for the sky, buried in a pile of other bodies, broken and bloody corpses just laid out for anyone to see. It was a message the foul creature knew they were tracking it. A sharp intake of breath sounded out behind them. Neither man was surprised. They had felt her trailing behind them, her obvious curiosity in them pushing her to follow, to witness with her own eyes what the men who stole from Kami did with their theft. She now wished she hadn't followed. What happened? Tsukuyomi asked. She was no stranger to death, having witnessed and caused bloodshed on and off the battlefield, but never before had she seen such malice, such horrid massacre in all her life. No matter what the reason, there was never a proper cause to murder children. They were innocent. The sins of their ancestors were just that, their ancestors. This was an ugly thing, something that made her sick. This is the work of the real enemy. Tsukuyomi-san. Hagoromo spoke, the anger in his voice cutting the very silence like a hot knife through warm butter. A brutal, disgusting act meant to anger us. Hagoromo began to walk through the blood-stained village, a look in his eyes that Tsukuyomi could not make out. There's only one thing wrong with his little plan. Amira began, his pale eyes filled with wrath and fury. Tsukuyomi turned her head to the tall man, her face questioning. Amira looked to his brother, the two of them sharing a look. It worked. The sound of Hagoromo clapping his hands together, his fingers then interlacing, was heard. And then suddenly, and without warning, the entire village lit up in a dark purple light. Tsukuyomi's eyes widened, her heart nearly stopping. The sheer size and density of the chakra the man before her was unleashing on the village was, to be blunt, omnipotent. He hadn't even used a sliver of a fraction of this kind of power against her. If he had, she would have surely died immediately. She was once again afraid of the holy soldier. The purple flames licked at the blood-soaked soil, a presence she was vaguely familiar with. Her breathing was labored, her throat suddenly dry. With her own eyes she was witness to the most frightening feat she had ever seen in her lifetime. Yama, the king of hell, rose, his eyes matching that of the man she was now terrified of. The priest was commanding the bloody king of hell with another huge surge of chakra, and the great mouth of Yama stretched open to impossible proportions, obeying the commands of the sage again, with another incredibly ridiculous amount of chakra. The king began to spit green lights within seconds. Tsukuyomi knew what the lights were. They were souls, the souls of the dead. The holy man was resurrecting the dead. It was terrifying, it was absurd, it was impossible, it was beautiful. Hagoromo wasn't just reviving the dead. He was like a beacon of rejuvenation. The scarred and broken bodies of the unfortunate murdered, healing at rates not possible. Hagoromo was washing the death from the land, breathing life back into the village and both the villagers. In nature, he was fixing the world, it seemed. Tsukuyomi managed to tear her hypnotizing stare from the man and fixed it at his brother. She was met with something rather strange. Hamura was smiling. The last soul left the king of hell's mouth, the last of the deceased, raised with a silent command. Yama slowly faded back into the ground. The purple flames, an overwhelmingly dark presence, retreating, moving with purpose. The brothers began to make their way out of the village, a confused goddess hot on their heels. Why hadn't they waited for the mortals to gain consciousness? Why hadn't they accepted the inevitable thanks and reverence they would have definitely received? It was a little suspicious. Her curiosity eventually won out, and she asked the question that practically burned the tip of her tongue, demanding to be voiced. Why did you leave before the mortals woke? She raised an eyebrow. Have you something to hide? Hagoromo stopped Hamura, doing the same. The priest looked tired. The next words he spoke would change the way the goddess looked at him forever. I wish to keep my humanity. Time skip. Naruto walked with purpose, Itachi by his side, to the Uchiha compound. This trivial nonsense would end today. He would make sure of it. The Uchiha clan, one of the founders of the great Konohagakure no Sado, was planning to do something very, very stupid. It shouldn't have been surprising, though all of humanity seemed infantile through his new eyes, but it still seemed too foolish to be contrived by actual adults. The mere thought sent his already baffled mind into something intimate with oblivion, and that said something about this coup d'état. His descendants were planning the Kyuubi attack had damaged more than just the village itself. With the attack, the relationship between the Uchiha with the rest of the villagers was all but broken. Herded into a corner of the village like sheep, the Uchiha had felt betrayed, ostracized by the very place they had shed blood for, protected for years, going as far as turning their backs on Uchiha Madara, their beloved patriarch. As a result, the sheep took off their clothes and the wolves emerged. They cast aside their loyalties and took up the sword, believing the only freedom they could find was through a takeover. It was nothing but something akin to childish retaliation in the eyes of the blonde, though the village was in the wrong for dumping the blame for something they had no part of on the clan as a whole. That did not mean the Uchiha were in the right with what they were planning. War was inevitable. Unfortunately, in this shinobi world, weakness was one of the many sparks that could flare up a war. If one village struck, the others would follow. It was like a chain reaction, a sequence of events that could be predicted by even the thickest of fools. If the Uchiha attacked those loyal to the Sandaime and the current system of things would retaliate, it would end in something even more disgusting than world wars. Civil war. When family fought family, it was the saddest of things. Unity was crucial, if not the very foundation of peace, and when people of one nation fought one another, it was the exact opposite of what needed to be done. And with civil war, no matter the victor, the village would be weakened, and weakness, as stated before, was the harbinger of war. A bringer of peace such as the Rikudo Sennin would have none of that when he was told by a distraught Itachi, which was one of the few times he had seen the boy not his stoic calm self, that something drastic would be definite if the situation with the Uchiha and Konoha Council didn't change fast. He knew what was needed to be done. That's when he decided to step in, to put all of his cards on the table, to take his first step in changing the world, to bringing it peace. The fear and anxiety in the person he called friend's eyes had been a gentle but needed push in the right direction. It was time he spoke to the Uchiha of Konoha. Arriving at the clan compound, Itachi led Naruto to his family's home, a nervous look in his onyx eyes. Naruto noticed this and smiled. "Do not worry, little dragon," he began. "This is for the sake of our people, our family." Itachi felt a pang in his heart. Finally someone who thought like him, and Shursui arrived, having what was needed to change the current cycle, the cycle of hatred. Hi Sennin-sama. Itachi replied. He took a deep breath of the afternoon village air, schooling his emotions into cool stoicism. It really surprised Naruto how the little dragon could calm his mind with such ease. It was a skill most had to work their entire lives for, and even then complete mastery of one's emotions was as rare as it was difficult. But of course Itachi was always one to completely break plausibility. He was but a child himself, and yet even in this war-bound shinobi world he had access to skills that made veterans green with envy. He could truly be a nightmare if he had sunken as low as the rest of humanity. Again, despite all odds, Itachi was, and this was what earned him the respect of the Rikudo Sennin. A pacifist, he possessed power. He didn't crave it. He could look down on others, but he didn't. He could take as many lives as he wanted, but chose to stay his blade when he could. Yes, Uchiha Itachi was like him, like his brother. He was a bringer of peace. "I'm home," Itachi called out when they walked into the lavish home of the clan head. Traditionally styled, Naruto decided that it was too much for his tastes. They walked through a small hallway, their feet making soft noises on the wooded floors. Entering what he believed to be a kitchen, the two were greeted by a beautiful woman with long black hair. Itachi's mother smiled when she saw her son. Itachi-kun. Makoto greeted gently, her smile somewhat falling when she saw who was with him. Who's this, Itachi-kun?" she asked as politely as she could. She wasn't hesitant about the blonde because of his status as the J word. That's what Naruto started calling it, Jinchuriki, being just too ugly a word to leave his tongue. But because of who his parents were, Makoto was one of the few people Uzumaki Kushina could confide in. That being said, Makoto knew that the red-headed woman was pregnant before Minato-san did. She knew Naruto was her best friend's son, that he was the son of the Yondaime, but she had to stay away from the boy. All Uchiha were forbidden to have any sort of contact with him. "Mother," Itachi began, his voice that of an ANBU operative of Konohagakure. "Not her little baby. Where is father?" he asked. He looked to the blonde. "We need to speak," he continued. "It's of great importance." She was silent, not able to answer her son's question. In front of a non-Uchiha, the Naka shrine was a holy place. Outsiders were not allowed to enter or even know of its existence. The shrine just so happened to be the place for their conspiratorial meetings, where they practiced high treason. His mother's silence was all the answer he needed. "Come, Mother," he turned, walking towards the door. "You should be witness to this as well." And with that, Itachi walked out of their home, Uzumaki, Naruto at his side, headed towards the Naka shrine. Makoto had a strange feeling about what was going to happen. She just couldn't determine if it was going to be a good strange or a bad one. "Explain yourself, Itachi." The deep and distinctly shocked voice of his father, Uchiha Fugaku, vibrated in the small room they entered not a minute ago. When Itachi walked into the Naka shrine with a stranger, the clan head had been shocked when he noticed the stranger was Uzumaki. Naruto, of all people, he had been furious. His son was putting the entire clan at risk. "Father, this coup you are planning." Itachi looked to his friend, who, nodding his head, gave him the courage to do what was right. "It ends today," he spoke, his voice laced with authority. Fugaku was not impressed. "And why is that, boy?" he asked. Itachi stayed silent, letting the person who decided it was a smart idea to speak to the Uchiha like they were foolish juveniles talk because I say it does. Fugaku Baka his host body's characteristics came and went like a fickle woman. It was very annoying. An outsider, never mind a child, has absolutely no right to speak here, nor do they deserve to speak to me in such a way. Fugaku replied calmly, even though his expression was that of annoyance. But it is you who is both the child and the unworthy Naruto's. Smirked the man's scowl amusing him. You will listen to me, boy. I promise you that he usually didn't speak like this, his innate polite respectfulness always taking over, but this was a time when it was necessary. The Uchiha in a general sense were the embodiment of hubris. The only way to make them listen was, well, to actually make them listen. I have no intentions of letting you speak to me like this. Uzumaki Fugaku was still trying his best to keep his cool. Injuring the Jinchuriki, who just happened to wield the Rinnegan, would be catastrophic. The Uchiha were already on thin ice at the moment. A spectacle like that would have the village looking where they couldn't afford them to look. Naruto's ringed eyes met the black ones of the Uchiha clan head, and everything changed slowly. One by one, black tomo began to appear on the rings of the purple eyes. Every time a single tomo appeared, Fugaku couldn't help but blink. Makoto, who was sitting next to her husband, gasped, her heart stopping. A Rinnegan with 9 tomo sitting on its rings stared at the Uchiha patriarch and matriarch. He had made his point and fulfilled his promise. They would now listen to him. Do I have your attention now, Fugaku? He asked, dropping the baka, knowing that he'd have to suppress his childish tendencies for the conversation to go as planned. He took the man's silence as a yes and continued, it saddens me to my very core, Fugaku, that the Uchiha are treated in such a way. He stated in complete honesty. It also saddens me, however, that you have sunken so low. The Uchiha clan head narrowed his eyes, a dangerous glint in the now crimson orbs. See, he began right there. That is what shall be your downfall, he sighed. Makoto just stayed silent, watching the blonde with mute awe. His eyes, they were, he said that those eyes would return. Father, I have successfully secured the Uchiha's safety, Itachi announced, snapping his father out of his angry thoughts. Oh, he asked patronizingly. And how's that, he asked, still upset that his son had brought a stranger into their sacred shrine. The Rikudo Sennin, the little dragon, spoke his name into existence. He walks the earth again. His face was one of complete seriousness, not a shred of doubt or farce in his eyes. He was telling the truth, or at least he truly believed it was. You interrupt an important meeting, bring an outsider to our holy ground, and all you have to say for it is that a man long dead has returned to save us. Fugaku stood fixed, Itachi, with a look of rage and disappointment, and stalked towards the door, his already thin patience vanishing. I do not wish to save the Uchiha clan alone, Fugaku. Naruto's soft voice rang through the room, almost echoing off the cold stone walls. Naruto smirked, already knowing he had caught the man's attention. With that, I plan on saving the entire world from what now plagues it like a disease. I wish to save it from the shinobi curse. There was silence for what seemed like an eternity. However, it was probably less than 20 seconds before Fugaku turned. You claim much, Uzumaki, he whispered, his Uchiha blood not letting him to just completely dismiss it all as words of an over-imaginative child. And when his prodigal son sat next to said child, nothing but a stoic expression marring his face, he couldn't help but wonder, a minuscule amount of wonder at that. If this was the truth, for if it was, it would mean the continuation of the Uchiha, the greatest clan to still walk the nations. I claim nothing but the truth, Naruto continued, and if we're being truthful, I must say I'm more than a little disappointed in you. He let his gaze fall on even that of Makoto. All of you. The matriarch flinched while those eyes held her in their sights. It was like he could see her very soul. The fact that he didn't like what he saw somehow hurt her, which was very odd, this being the first time she had ever met her friend's son. And why is that? Fugaku decided to humor him. Naruto looked to Fugaku, and when their eyes met, the patriarch saw something no 7-year-old should possess. His eyes seemed to carry that of an aged war veteran. They were almost dull, like the cruel truths of the world were known within those eyes. Seen with those eyes, it was enough to make the man flinch. The Uchiha, among others, are directly descended from me. He decided to speak with no half-truths, just the facts for my own blood. To fall into the shinobi way, this ugly decrepit thing, is heartbreaking. He held the stubborn man's gaze, looking at him like a disappointed father with their child. Had I not brought peace to this world, had I not shown you all the way? He shook his head. Had I not left behind instructions for those with eyes like ours? He brought his hands up in the air, a confused look in his eyes. I asked those of my lineage to safeguard humanity, to protect the land, not burn it to ash. His voice held a touch of anger, something that somehow worried the clan head. Was he really fearful of a child? You speak of the stone monument, Fugaku replied. You told the child about the sage stone. He aimed a dangerous look at Itachi, seething with anger at this point. No matter how fancy the blonde boy's eyes were, there was no way he was the great holy man. You will be punished for your treason, Itachi. Prove it. A soft silky voice rang out, almost lost to the ears of those present. Naruto turned to the Uchiha matriarch, a golden eyebrow raised. Proof that you are the Rikudo Sennin, she elaborated, her courage wavering under the gaze of those eyes. Under God's eyes. Itachi looked at his friend from the corner of his eye. Would Naruto prove his claim? When he saw the small smirk on his face, he knew he had his answer. Very well then, if I have to prove myself, so be it. He brought his hands together, but paused. Once I do this, the Uchiha stops immediately. Enough of th. Fugaku began to shout, but when the room flared with red and blue flame, his mind froze. Yin and yang mixed, colliding in an ethereal majestic purple, filling the stone-walled room, with pure untainted life energy, the likes of which felt so clean, so rejuvenating that it calmed the frantic, somewhat angered minds of Fugaku and Makoto. It was a show of raw creation, a power no one but Kami should ever wield. They stared at the purple shine with reverence, the very air thick, heavy, causing them to take breath slowly with trepidation, like they weren't sure if they had permission, the right to breathe in his presence. In the presence of this light, this creation, he called forth the words that attracted Itachi to him like bees to honey: Banbutsu Sozo. It took him some time, and he couldn't use it on the scale he was able to before, but with practice and meditation, the creation of all things was once again in his arsenal of abilities. The purple flame flared again, causing those in the room to shield their eyes upon opening them. Sitting in the now open palms of its creator, a small was that a dragon stared up at the Uchiha, blinking slowly. He had created life to a majestic creature whose species was long extinct. The fire breathers gasped, seeing a child produce life from nothing, creating a mythical creature before their very eyes. It was his proof. He had proved it. Only an idiot would further deny it. Uzumaki Naruto was the Rikudo Sennin. Makoto bowed, followed by Itachi, and then Fugaku. The respect and reverence for the greatest man to be born almost palpable. Naruto smiled. Raise your heads, Uchiha. He spoke to the family, bowing to him. He had no desire to be worshipped. I am not your god or your king. He wished to be their guide, the light in the dark, to lead them to peace, to harmony. What are you then? Fugaku asked. There was no spite or anger in his words. He honestly wanted to know what the holy man would do for them. He was under so much stress with the clan that he almost forgot what hope and happiness felt like. The only time he ever felt something more than resentful rage was when he saw his youngest child smile. Sasuke was his little slice of relief. In the thick darkness, he and his whole clan were drowning in the small baby dragon. Beat its tiny wings hovering in the air before resting on Itachi's shoulder. If I'm still being honest, I have no clue. He sighed. I brought humanity peace once before. I gave them understanding, harmony, a paradise on earth. He shook his head. But even with everything, humanity still wanted more. My teachings were corrupted, my beliefs spit on. He looked to his left at the plain wall. I don't know what the world needs anymore. He looked at Itachi. Does it need peace and prosperity that is brought with love and kindness? He swallowed hard, looking to Fugaku. Or does it need subjugation brought upon with a dictator's regime and domination? He sighed. I really don't know anymore. Subjugation? Makoto questioned softly. Why would someone like you need to use subjugation? She asked. You're a holy man, you're all but worshipped in this time. All you'd need to do is announce your presence to the world, and you'd have everyone at your command. Naruto chuckled dryly. My old name isn't even known to this era, he replied. Yes, Rikudo Sennin is still around, but even that title is only whispered in fairy tales and fables. He shook his head. The world wouldn't follow me, not now, not in this era. He knew this from the beginning. Shinobi think themselves invincible. They answer to either one person or no one. Loyalties are something fierce to break. Even for someone like me, it would be nigh impossible to unite the entirety of the elemental nations. So suddenly my name means nothing in this time. Uzumaki Naruto is nothing but an orphan Jinchuriki with the eyes of a fantasy man. He once again shook his head. No, that would not work. He had already thought of all this, but still, world domination sounds. Makoto left the words to hang evil. He finished. I once thought that way as well. What changed? Fugaku asked, curious. I wish I could say humanity, but the sad fact is that humans haven't changed one bit. They just stepped their game up. Even before my first life, war plagued the land. It's almost as if it's an innate trait written in our DNA. He chuckled. What changed was me. He looked Fugaku in the eyes again. I'm not so naive anymore. I no longer have faith in mortals like I used to. Naruto asked Fugaku the question he wanted to know the most. My tablet. Have you read it? What little you could. Fugaku nodded. He looked at his wife, and with a conceding nod he began to be truthful. I have not gained the powers of the Mangekyo, so I was only able to decipher very little of your words. He sighed deeply, like he was extremely sad about his next words, yet saying them with something akin to pride. My wife, however, unlocked them years ago in the war. Eyes wide in mild horror, Itachi glanced at his mother. Yes, Makoto had gained the cursed eyes when she was forced to watch her father tortured and killed during the Battle of Two Flags in the Third Shinobi World War, unlocking the Mangekyo after her father no longer took breath in this world. Makoto used the fatal techniques it blessed upon her, or cursed. She was able to slaughter both shinobi villages that rallied under Iwa's name. The utter destruction and bloodshed had been great, even when compared to the great destroyer of armies, which said a lot about it. If compared to Namake's Minato, it may also be the reason the Battle of Two Flags was rarely mentioned. It wasn't pleasant for anyone on any side of the conflict. Mother, Itachi whispered in sadness. He would not pity her, however. No matter how gentle and ladylike she acted, she was still an Uchiha through and through. Pity was a great disrespect in the eyes of the crimson fire breathers. Even the small dragon perched on his shoulder tilted its head, looking at the woman with an undeterminable expression. She has deciphered much more than I, almost half of the great stone, and shared her knowledge with me. Fugaku continued, and even still you chose this shinobi life over one of guardians, he asked, no longer angered but hurt. I don't understand. Makoto began. The tablet says that we are superior to others, that we should do everything in our power to continue your legacy of greatness. She looked confused with Naruto's outrageous expression. Unless the other half explains further, you more or less told us to be kings, she finished in a soft, unsure tone. The blonde was silent, taking in this information. What the Uchiha Haim had just explained, the stone monument he left behind was either tampered with or replaced. This angered him more than he would explain. Someone was speaking to his people using his name, telling them Kami knows what it was the ultimate sin, the greatest weapon. It was the serpent's tongue. Take me to the tablet, he commanded. He was not happy. Naruto sat in front of the ugliest sight he had seen in a long time. His stone monument, his life's hardships and helping words were gone, replaced with artifice, with his Rinnegan. All that was the great sage stone, as the Uchiha apparently called it. He was able to read everything the tablet said, or more accurately lied. It spoke of a man who was drunk with his power, a man who considered himself and those who were born from him the rightful rulers of humanity. This disgusting stone spoke of gods and kings, explaining that the ultimate power, the Rinnegan, was the only way for the kings to once again be gods, encouraging those with powerful eyes to do everything in their power to attain the eyes of God. It was sickening. He snapped. Anger, white hot pure anger, welled within him. Kurama's chakra resonating with the emotion. He was the embodiment of, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Someone had the nerve to so openly stand against him, to defile his name, his words with such carelessness. Naruto craved for something he never craved so much before. He wanted blood. He wanted the blood of the person or persons who led his people astray for so long. He closed his eyes. The three Uchiha who stood silently behind him, not understanding the gravity of his rage that was about to change Kurama. The mighty Kyuubi no Kitsune was a being of pure chakra, the largest fragment of a god, split by a man who could very well take its place. He was a powerful force of nature, his very tails able to cause tsunamis. He was the most powerful bijou in existence, and was not easily frightened. He had faced men and beast alike, and never before had he ever showed fear, even when facing foes such as Senju Hashirama or Namikaze Minato. You could not scare what was fear incarnate, the embodiment of hate. He was centuries old, and in all his years he had never been scared. Other emotions besides hate. He was very intimate with loneliness, betrayal, pain, and despair. All these things he had felt at least once in his very long life, but fear was still a very foreign concept to the third eldest son of the Rikudo Sennin. But when his father appeared in the shared mindscape, their link between minds, with 9 Tomo sitting on the rings of his Rinnegan, a look of absolute rage that disrupted the still waters below, he couldn't help but think that the feeling he had in his stomach was fear. Kurama was afraid because his father was probably the only being ever created that had the power to kill even a bijou. He knew his father wasn't looking at him with those hate-filled eyes, but even being in the presence of such anger that stemmed from the Sage of Six Paths struck the fear of God in him. He almost felt sorry for whoever angered such a powerful man, because his father was the scariest thing to grace this earth. Even the most peaceful of men could be pushed too far, and that's exactly what Kurama could see. Someone had pushed his father too far, and that only meant one thing: this person's end was nigh. Kurama. Naruto spoke, his voice still that of the 7-year-old hosts, but the power behind it was undoubtedly that of the great soldier of peace. Father Kurama tried to keep his head up, trying his hardest not to instinctively bow to obey this man before him. It was incredibly difficult. Someone has deceived my people using my own tongue to do so. Kurama was able to gain his composure somewhat, his shock overwhelming his fear. My tablet has been tampered with. His father was so angry, so upset that someone would push his children into this dark place. Someone has forced hubris onto my descendants. Kurama's fear was now almost completely replaced with an emotion he was so very familiar with. The serpent's tongue has spoken as if they were my words. Blasphemy! Kurama screamed. His fear vanished as fast as it was brought upon him. Anger in its place. Kurama, he continued, it is time I fulfill my promise to you. He brought his arms up, aiming them at the great bars that held his son as a prisoner. The eyes of God gazed upon the cage, and instantly a gripping sound filled their ears. The bars creaked, small cracks beginning to form before his crimson-slit eyes. The metal he couldn't even scratch began to shake under the pressure of his father's technique, the same technique he used so many times in his first life. His father whispered those two powerful words, prying the cage apart, and his ears and soul drunk them in the beauty in them, never ceasing to amaze him. Bansho Tenin, Fugaku, Itachi, and Makoto had believed that they were immune to killing intent, to the mere flaring of chakra in an intimidating fashion, but standing so close to the pressure the blonde was releasing had thoroughly dismissed that belief. It started as dark, powerful killing intent, one that All but screamed anger and betrayal. The entire hidden room went cold, the air rushing away, fleeing the child. It was like a sudden switch, one that when turned on there was no turning it off, not until it chose to. Then, accompanying the outrageously scary killing intent, a sudden surge of mighty chakra filled the sacred grounds the Uchiha had watched over for years. The chakra was the exact opposite of the terrifyingly dark intent to kill. It was gentle yet firm, it was soothing yet jarring, it was both powerful, frighteningly so, and in the only word the Uchiha could describe such clean chakra divine. The walls shook, cracking under the pressure of such might. The ground rumbled, the air crying in fear, and then a polar opposite joined the fray. Dark, ominous chakra that could only be described as demonic wrapped around the small form, filling the room with a dark red-black energy, only to vanish just as fast as it appeared. With the Sharingan the Uchiha witnesses could remember, the overwhelming chakra signature of the Kyuubi Naruto was confronting the greatest of the Bijou, and with his confident, joyed face they could tell that he did so on his own accord. The fact that he showed no fear but happiness only further proved that he was the creator of the Bijou and the father of their clan. With the might of Kami herself, the father set free the son. Naruto stared at the free form of his son in silence, marveling at the beauty he possessed. It was enough to calm his enraged mind, but it wasn't enough to make him forget. I plan on hunting who's responsible for this sin, and I plan to make them suffer just as my children have suffered by his hand. He looked to his son, an expression of uncertainty. I wish it were different, but with my current strength, he sighed. Will you help me, my son? It pained him to ask something so heinous of his son, but he couldn't afford not to. Kurama, standing before his father in all his glory, spoke in such a genuine tone that it worried the great sage. As much as it brought him happiness for you, father, he wore an absolutely determined expression. I'd rip the world asunder. He smiled, feeling the love in such dark, menacing words. He opened his mouth to speak when suddenly the most amazing thing happened. Bright gilded chains rose from the watery ground, wrapping around Kurama with a determined grace. You will not have my child, Bakafox, a beautiful female voice shouted from behind him. Agreed, a second voice called out, the gentle yet powerful male voice. Also coming from behind him. Naruto turned and was fascinated by what he saw. His parents were ridiculously clever. Time skip. The gilded chains that held his son back were so bright, so beautiful, it reminded him of his wife. Naruto turned, his powerful eyes meeting what should be impossible. Long scarlet hair was the first thing he saw. Her fair skin and beautiful violet eyes came next. The determined and slightly fearful expression on her face greeting his shocked one. She was Uzumaki Kushina, his mother. His mortal mother. She was beautiful. A shock of bright sun-kissed hair greeted him next. Ocean blue eyes locking onto his purple-ringed ones. The man before him was a legend, a hero, a daydream, and a nightmare. He was Namikaze Minato, his mortal father. His parents. I won't let you hurt my son, Kushina shouted, tightening the chains that were made completely out of her chakra. Kurama grunted under the pressure but stayed still nonetheless. His father would not let them touch him, he was sure of it. Naruto, Minato yelled. He opened his mouth to yell again but was silenced when he saw his son's eyes and the following smirk. Naruto turned back to his son, simply waving a hand towards the bound Kurama. With little to no effort, the gilded chains fell splashing into oblivion. No matter who they were, no being would touch his children ever again. He turned, his face that of a warrior during the calm before a war. Father, he called out. Mother, he continued, we have much to discuss. He could see the confusion and worry in their eyes, but continued anyways. With a wave of his hand, the trio of humans were no longer standing in the dark, dank sewer they had been not 3 seconds ago. Instead, the small family stood in what looked like a candlelit room, except there were no visible walls or ceiling. It was warm, but a small breeze somehow managed to brush against their skin. Naruto gave them a small reassuring smile, hoping it would calm their frantic minds. Naruto, the seal. Kushina started, a panicked look marring her beautiful face. We have to seal the Kyuubi before it tries. Kushina was silenced when small arms enveloped her into a warm embrace. So you are my mother in this life then, he whispered, his voice full of happiness and content. You are a beautiful woman, mother, he finished. Kushina was taken aback for a moment before allowing her own arms to hug her son back, her motherly instincts kicking into overdrive. He was so big, he was so much smaller the last time she saw him, his infant body fitting into her hands. My Naruto, she whispered shakily. My son, she cried. Her hands were shaking and he could tell that she was crying long before the wet tears touched his scalp. Naruto allowed his mother to embrace him for many moments, their bodies so close, their warmth so inviting, it was almost as if it were real. The Kyuubi. Minato tried, but his voice fell on deaf ears. He sighed, deciding that if he couldn't beat them, join them. The yellow flash embraced his family for the very first time. They were reunited after many minutes of mere holding. The small family finally pulled apart, and Naruto could see the tearing eyes of his mortal parents that made what he was about to say all the more difficult. I am not your son. The incredibly stupid village was now beyond hope. They were that stupid. He was merely 8, still a child in most aspects of the word. He had just turned 8 and already the village declared him an official shinobi of Konohagakure no Sato. It was incredibly disconcerting. He was a child, a baby, and they gave him a forehead protector and a blade, stripping him of his childhood and forcing him into adulthood. It was even still nigh inconceivable in his mind. How could a civilization be so lost in their ways to give children weapons and tell them that they were now adults? Moronic fools, the whole lot of them. It came rather quick. If you were honest, he had intended to only play the shinobi role until he was sure of what he wished to do, but that changed when he was revealed to the entire Uchiha clan. It took a little convincing, but his descendants now secretly, of course, renounced their loyalty to Konoha and would follow him wherever he may take them. It was a huge step in securing the harmony of this world, one that he was completely confident about. He had finally learned the customs of shinobi village politics, and that had been the reason for actually following through with his shinobi training. Apparently, no matter what anyone said, any actions he would most definitely need to take would always lead back to Konoha. Fingers would be pointed, and one wrong word could result in definite war. It was a fact he hadn't planned for. Itachi had come up with the idea. Actually, it was rather simple, but it was dirty and underhanded, something a shinobi would do, not him, but it was the only way he could go about it. Hence he and Itachi would become missing nin shinobi who betrayed or abandoned their home village. It was an ugly title, but he was already classified as the ugliest title known to man, so he conceded becoming a missing nin was actually a lot harder than some would think, or a missing nin of a caliber they needed to become. More specifically, they couldn't become petty criminals or even average ones. No, they needed to be the top of the food chain. They needed to be feared. Using fear as a weapon was something he very much disliked, but it was a necessity in this world. If they were feared, less shinobi would be sent to collect them. Their names would strike fear into green shinobi, giving them more and more room to work. They needed to be feared to be recognized as dangerous men, because if villages were constantly trying to track them down, their plans would take years to complete. They were both in possession of powerful dojutsu, the greatest in the elemental nations, and Naruto carried what Konoha believed to be theirs. They were both more valuable than all the gold any village had, so to gain the recognition they needed, they had to commit crimes of the highest degree. That came later, though. Currently Naruto was patiently waiting to be placed on a team, which was a little annoying. He had gained shinobi status halfway through the academy year, and since there were no openings on active teams, he had to wait for the next batch of graduates. Unfortunately, Itachi was not given permission to take him on missions outside of the village, so he was stuck with the miserable D ranks the Hokage assigned to him as solo missions. By this time he had completed 30 D-rank missions, all of which were so dull he wanted to rip his hair out. The Hokage commissioned him to file the paperwork in the correct cabinets. When they were finished, it was a waste of his time, and he had better things to do, or at least more important things to do. There was much work to do with the Uchiha. There was absolutely no way his descendants would stay in Konoha, not after being treated like sheep, but they had nowhere else to go. Not yet. He needed to have access with the outside world to find the perfect place to leave his people while he went out and gathered his children. Every day that passed, his sons and daughters were forced into a life of solitude and servitude. It was something he thought of constantly, their loneliness and hatefulness. And then there was the conversation he needed to have with the Sandaime that he absolutely did not look forward to, even in the slightest bit. The stone monument that had been tampered with to the point that was hardly his stone monument anymore brought something to his attention, and during his little reunion with his mortal parents he slowly discovered something that smelt sinister. "What do you mean you're not our son?" Kushina asked in confusion. Naruto gave her a sorrowful expression. "I am Uzumaki Naruto, but at the same time I am not," he started. His mother looked at him in a way only a mother could, a way that hurt him to continue. "The best way that I can explain it is to be blunt," he began. "It may be confusing, but please listen to the end, okay?" Kushina went to say something, but Minato stopped her. "Our son has something to tell us, Kushina," he stated in such a way that practically screamed with the power he once had. His father looked to be an average, kind and gentle man, but those that knew him to be the deadliest man since the Sandaime in his prime. "Let's listen to him like good parents should," he continued with a small smile that could even make his enemies blush. Kushina was silent for a moment before nodding slightly. Naruto gave his mortal father a smile of his own in thanks. "Before beginning, the two of you have at least heard of reincarnation, correct?" he asked his parents. When he received short nods, he went on, "Well, I have been reincarnated as your son, as Uzumaki Naruto." Seeing the worried expressions of his parents, Naruto held up a hand to prevent them from interrupting. "Please just listen," he kindly requested. "When I first walked the earth, I was known as Otsutsuki Hagoromo. I have been called many things in that life: a priest, a sage, a holy man, the savior of this world, but the most prominent title I was given was the Rikudo Sennin." Minato finished breathlessly. Kushina looked at her husband in exasperation, but when she turned back to her son, his expression genuine. She lost her breath. Her son, was he truly the Rikudo Sennin? Was her Naruto the reincarnation of the holy sage of six paths? "Yes, father, I am was the Rikudo Sennin," he admitted. "When you gave birth to, he was about to say host, but intelligently reminded himself that the host's parents were in front of him, so changed his words skillfully. Naruto, I was lured to a confrontation of wills. These words confused his parents a great deal. Your son was to be the next link in a rather long chain. He decided to let them know the whole truth. My human children Indra and Azura have been locked in a battle that's lasted 1,000 years. He sighed while shaking his head. Like my own chakra, theirs was too powerful, too sentient, that it could never truly pass onto the pure world. Unlike me, however, they chose to transmigrate to be reincarnated as humans and continue their foolish war. Minato and Kushina listened with extreme interest. They were hearing ancient history, that's for sure. The last two links in the chain reshaped the landscape and changed much of the world. He continued, they were Uchiha Madara and Senju Hashirama, he stated, causing his parents to gasp. Are you saying that two of the most powerful shinobi in our history were actually reincarnations of your sons whose sole purpose was to continue an age-long war that's never been settled? Minato asked, trying to connect the dots of the story. Yes, Naruto began, they were both possessed by my human children. Before he could continue, Kushina spoke up. Why do you keep saying human children? She asked. What other kind of children are there? It was kind of irritating her the way he made sure to put human before children when speaking of his war-thirsty sons. Naruto smiled, waving his hand behind him. Kurama's free form was led into the room of beginnings, the birthplace of all nine Bija, the tailed beasts. Naruto began in a gentle, loving tone. Are my creations my children? Kushina stumbled back, taken aback by his declaration. Kurama is my third child, my first creation. He turned to his beautiful nine-tailed son and smiled. Why you? Kushina tried to say, her words jumbled and her mind a mess. Naruto could see his father tense, his shinobi-trained body ready to take action at any moment, and when he took his father's speed and natural reflexes in consideration, he was somewhat hesitant to test the theory of him being in total control of his own mind. Kurama will not harm you, have no fear. He tried to reassure his nervous parents. He isn't the bloodthirsty monster you believe him to be. He tried. He is misunderstood and bitter due to his constant unjust imprisonment. Unjust? Kushina spit out. He's taken countless lives, ours included. In case you forgot, she finished. Naruto sighed. If you were captured for the only purpose of leverage and pointless wars and sealed into human prisons for years at a time, wouldn't you be upset? He spoke, trying his best to defend his son. And let's not forget about the man in the mask. Kurama chimed his 2 cents in the eyes of the yondaime, immediately widening. The man in the mask, he shouted. That's right, Naruto. You, the blonde, raised a hand. Though please, whatever you wish to say can be explained later. He started. I wish to finish our previous conversation before we start another. Waving Kurama out of his parents' sight, they nodded, allowing him to continue. When Madara mixed Hashirama's cells, he was able to waken the Rinnegan through the combining of Azura's and Indra's chakra. He explained, before that happened, the cycle should have continued. Azura and Indra should have transmigrated. Uzumaki Naruto was to inherit Azura's chakra, while Uchiha Sasuke was to inherit Indra's. Makoto's son, Kushina said sadly. Naruto went on, when Indra remembered the power he possessed when he had Azura's chakra, he desired more. He always wished to have my eyes, to have my power, but was never able to accomplish his goals in his life until Uchiha Madara. Yes, Madara was brilliant, for he was able to accomplish something even Otsutsuki Indra, a genius even in the eyes of the Sage of Six Paths, could not. It was frightening. Deciding to strike at his brother while he transmigrated to another host, he tried to absorb Azura's chakra. He then smirked. That's when I showed up. He still didn't know how it was possible, but that was of little importance. I was beckoned to my children. An unknown force brought me to my struggling children, and that's when I decided to step in to break the cycle. He looked at his parents. Are you still with me? He asked. Kushina and Minato nodded, if hesitantly. Yes, I think we are. Minato replied. Please continue, he offered, nodding. Naruto continued. I then proceeded to absorb my children's chakra and then bonded with your son's soul. This made both Minato and Kushina sharp in wanting to understand everything that involved their son there. Naruto, so you can say that I am both Hagoromo and Naruto, but because Naruto was but a newborn and I had already lived a full life and then some, I took over as the main influence. He smiled. Naruto is me and I am Naruto. We are no longer two separate beings, but one new improved one. He reached out to his mother, pressing his small hand into hers. Even though I know of my past life's mother, I still see you as my mother. This life is the only one that matters right now, and you are my only mother in this life. He looked at her hesitantly. Unless you aren't okay with that, he whispered. He knew the logic behind everything, but that didn't matter to him. Uzumaki Kushina was his mother, no matter who anyone saw him as. She had given birth to him, to his body, his temple, so in that sense she really was his biological mother. Kushina was silent for all but a millisecond before she wrapped her arms around her son and squeezed. No matter who or what you are or have been, she said in a comforting tone, you will always be my son. If he thought he'd get rid of her that easy, he was in for a big shock. She was his mama. End of story. He couldn't help the small genuine smile on his face. He had never felt such strong love from a mother in his life. It was pleasant. And no matter how much you'd like to get rid of me, Minato started wrapping his arm around his family again. "I am your father, you hear me," he said proudly. "It wasn't every day you fathered the Rikudo Sennin." Naruto chuckled at his father. He liked the sound of that, his father, and sighed happily. He had a family. He smiled to himself, letting Kurama fade back into existence. The towering form of the Kyuubi felt his father's insistence and decided to obey his silent plea. Kushina and Minato were startled when a large, rather fluffy orange tail wrapped around the three of them. At first they thought the vile dark creature betrayed even its creator, but were greatly surprised when nothing followed. The embrace of the nine tails was hugging them. The Kyuubi Kushina began, "He's really not evil incarnate?" she asked aloud. "To no one in particular." Naruto smiled. "Of course not." He petted the mighty tail of his son. "He's just been so mistreated by the people he was made to help keep balance for, and betrayal can make anyone do horrible things," he stated firmly. "You know, he was created as the embodiment of hope and love. At the beginning his parents looked at him like he had grown a second head." "I'm serious," he began, "but when betrayal occurs, hope turns into despair and love turns into hate." He knew they understood. Humanity corrupted him, turning him into what he is today. Kurama was silent, already knowing this. "But I plan to fix all of that," he stated confidently. "What do you mean?" Kushina asked. "I have brought peace and order to this world once before already," he said. "It's not easy, not in the slightest, but not impossible either." He shook his head. "The method I need to take is still a mystery, but the fact still remains. I will bring peace to the lands once again." His father swallowed hard. The prophecy, it was right. He smiled. "I was right," he finished, looking up at the giant fox. "Ah, you speak of Gamamaru's prophecy?" He started shocking his father. "Gamamaru?" he asked in confusion. Naruto began to laugh hard. "Okami," he rasped between chuckled. "Don't tell me he's so old he's even forgot his own name." He was now clutching his stomach in pain. The old toad who could foresee the future can't even remember his own name. He started to calm down. "That's just hilarious," he finished, taking in a deep breath before exhaling. "Wait," Minato began, "are you saying that the great toad sage of Mount Myaboku is named Gamamaru?" He then recoiled back as if he was struck, "and that he was alive when you first lived." He knew the toad was old, but that old? Hi, Naruto replied. "Gamamaru was born from my powerful natural energy Ninshu." Naruto explained. "The Mount Myaboku you speak of is most likely a location I used high amounts of what is it called in the era?" He thought for a moment before remembering the correct term. "Senjutsu." "Mount Myaboku must be a place I used senjutsu to the extreme." Minato and Kushina just nodded dumbly as they were explained the creation of the Honorable Toad summons. "Father, I believe it is time to discuss." The man in the mask, Kurama, spoke up, deciding to gently push the conversation into something that needed to be discussed. "I believe that he is responsible for the current situation with your Uchiha descendants," he finished. Kushina perked at that statement. "The Uchiha are your descendants?" she asked, almost completely forgetting her dislike for the Kyuubi. Naruto nodded. "Yes, they along with the Senju and Uzumaki are directly descended from me," he answered before smiling. "So technically, I'm your grandfather." Kushina-chan, he added the chan suffix to make his little joke even better. He quickly regretted that decision. "Don't speak to your mother like that, Naruto-chan," she snapped. Her hair began to flare ominously behind her. That's when Naruto decided firmly that mothers could be very scary. Kurama snickered at how his father was so utterly whipped into shape by a mortal woman before something rather strange happened to it. "Kurama," Kushina scolded the beast, "don't be a bad influence." He looked at her like she was crazy for talking to him like that. "Don't give me that look, I'm your grandma now." Even Naruto and Minato looked incredulous. "So don't give me any lip, boy," she shouted, her tone final. Naruto just shook his head. His mother really was something else. "Hi," Kurama conceded after a failed staring contest with the red-hot habanero. Kushina gave a look of smug victory. There was hope for her boys yet. After describing what actually happened the night of the Kyuubi attack to his son, Minato became silent, seeing the incredible rage in his son's feigned eyes. That's when Kurama decided to speak up. "Father," he began, "it was not Uchiha Madara who attacked that night." Minato met his slit gaze with a look of confusion. "Years ago that man put me under his control and forced me to fight the Shodai Hokage. I'd remember that man's chakra signature anywhere." He shook his head. "That was not Madara," he finished. "So someone is running around out there using Madara's name and has the skill to fool someone like the Yondaime Hokage." Naruto began in an angered tone. "Even if he is not Madara, he is dangerous," Naruto decided. "And then there's the fact that the stone monument." He let his words trail off before seeing his parents' confused look, so he chose to continue. "I left behind a stone monument for those who had ocular powers, hoping they'd reconsider when they had the eyes to decipher the entire thing." Minato caught the flush of new rage enter those powerful eyes of his son. "Somehow someone managed to tamper with it, writing down false messages as if they were my own words, and apparently according to the sage stone, Uchiha Madara survived the battle at the Valley of N." This had been very disconcerting to hear, but they had been talking about the man for a while now, and his very name didn't cause any immediate gasps of shock anymore. It seemed Madara was capable of anything. That's how they saw the man now, which made him so very deadly if he survived the masked man. could have some kind of affiliation with him. Minato thought out loud, and if that's the case we have a serious problem on our hands. Kushina looked at her husband. What do you mean, she asked curiously. Besides the obvious, he started receiving a nod from his wife. The alliance of two men who could enslave a bijou with a single look would complicate things. He decided to choose his words carefully. When it came to the tailed beasts around his son, he knew if anyone badmouthed Naruto he'd be the first to defend him, and not just because he was the fastest man alive, and the fact that the masked man was able to break through multiple ANBU guards. Separate you and I released the Q Kurama. He fixed his slip up and then fight me while unleashing the power of a bijou on the village all almost flawlessly. Will already make this plan of yours difficult, Naruto. He shook his head. I wish we didn't have to leave you, he hissed softly, his emotions in turmoil at the thought of abandoning his child again. Kushina mirrored his sorrow, turning to her son. I don't want to leave you either, Naruto-chan. She knew he was powerful in his own right, and that with age he would become the most powerful man to walk the earth again, but she was still his mother, and she still worried about him. A single tear fell from his mother's ducts before he was at her side, a wild grin on his face. Who said anything about you two leaving me? He touched two fingers to their heads, both his right and left hand's index and middle fingers, tapping their foreheads with a surge of chakra and raw creation. The diminishing chakra that tethered his parents' souls to the seal within him vanished, replaced with something different, something stronger. What did you just do? Kushina asked, her eyes wide in shock with her newfound energy. You two are incredibly clever, but when it comes to, once again he took a moment to think, or the correct term of a certain skill set in this era, before finishing. Yes, when it comes to Fuinjutsu my brother was superior in every way. He smiled somewhat sadly at the thought of his beloved brother, the man who stood at his side since they were born from the rabbit goddess. Being around him one can't help but pick up some rather useful tricks. When he saw the incredibly curious looks on their faces, he elaborated, your souls were anchored or tethered to this realm by the rather ingenious seal you used to trap Kurama. The giant fox grunted before Kushina gave him the grandma look, and he decided to watch his mouth. So far we understand, Kushina replied, but with that method only the specific chakra that was sealed away would exist, and when that ran out you two would vanish, your respective chakra unable to replenish itself. He smiled, but with this method he showed them the most complicated looking seal array they'd ever seen, evens on top of odds with more evens above those, but when you place an odd-numbered seal on an even-numbered seal or vice versa, an imbalance is created. Minato voiced both his and his wife's confusion. Naruto just smiled. That is true, he nodded before gaining a smirk. Unless you know how to layer two or more seals together. His parents' owlish eyes amused him. The odd-numbered seals are actual even-numbered ones. They're just layered on top of one another, appearing to be odd when it is actually even. You don't have to understand it, just know that I changed the anchor. He waved off the complicated art of layering seals onto other seals, deciding to explain the outcome, not the process. Your chakra will now replenish, feeding off the raw yin-yang chakra my soul exudes. His soul was the very essence of life and death, which was why he theorized he had control of both abstract powers. Unless I die the two of you could live forever off my life energy. Seeing the fearful expressions of Minato and Kushina, he just chuckled. It's not harmful in any way to my person at all. I won't even feel the drain. Trust me when I say I could power an entire village with my soul for eternity if I chose to, he reassured them. So Kushina began, we don't have to leave you then, she asked softly. Naruto smiled before the four of them were no longer standing in the room of beginnings, but in front of a rather cozy looking house that sat in the middle of a beautiful forest, a lake a short walk away from the house's porch. It's not very glamorous, Naruto started, but you two could stay here if you'd like, Kushina cried while Minato just nodded. They could stay a family. After finally leaving his mindscape he wasn't very surprised when not much time had passed at all, only a few minutes. He always knew that the brain could take in information at startling speeds, telling the Uchiha that he would lead them to the proverbial promise land. He continued his shinobi training for an entire year. Uchiha Itachi, Uzumaki, Kushina, and Namake's Minato training him in the ways of the silent assassin. He was sure that he was at the very least what the nations called Chunin, his skill surpassing many of the students attending the academy, which was what led him to his early promotion. But instead of joining the fray and exploring the world, he was put on paperwork duty. He sighed, finally allowed to take his leave from the Hokage's side for the day. He needed to get out of that stuffy office, and the longer he was around the aged Sarutobi, the harder it was to not just shout out the many secrets he kept. The only thing he was truly happy about that happened over the course of the year was that the Uchiha were no longer in danger of annihilation from Konoha. He had Fugaku clear things up with the village elders, and when backed by both Itachi and Shursui they had no reason to believe any different. So the Uchiha had a change of heart, good for them, but it was not the whole truth. The Uchiha no longer wanted to strip the Sandame's entire regime from Konoha, which was the truth, but that's where the truth stopped. The Uchiha were done with Konoha, no longer loyal to a nation that would so easily treat them like second-class citizens. No, they would follow Uzumaki Naruto, now the boy who proved to the entire clan that he was the sage of six paths. He would lead them out of chaos, and they would gladly accept his teachings of harmony and peace. To do so they were free, and it never felt so wonderful. After being dismissed from his missions, Naruto went to the Uchiha compound, his usual hangout, where he made his way to Itachi's home. They trained every day. No matter how busy they were, they needed to be ready, because when they implemented their plans they needed to be as strong as possible. Rasping his knuckles on the door, he waited for someone to greet him. Not even a minute later the door opened to reveal Uchiha Makoto, a woman his mother had explained was one of her greatest friends in her life. Naruto smiled at the raven-haired woman and bowed his head slightly. If she garnered the respect of his mother, then she had his respect. Uzumaki Kushina only ever kept the greatest of company. Makoto-san, he greeted. Makoto bowed back a little too deep for his liking and returned his smile. Itachi is in the back. Naruto-sama, she answered an unasked question. Already knowing why he was at their humble home, she still didn't know if she'd ever get over the fact that her son was the greatest friend of the Rikudo Sennin, or that the Rikudo Sennin actually walked the earth again. Just thinking about it gave her a small headache. Thank you, Makoto-san, he replied respectfully. Walking past her, he made his way to the small training grounds at the back of the house, knowing Itachi would be there 5 minutes early with a certain someone watching from the back porch. And sure enough, his little dragon was standing in the middle of the small training grounds, stretching, with a little Uchiha Sasuke sitting on the porch, kicking his legs back and forth, waiting for the spar to begin. Naruto smiled at the little tomato-loving boy who had been destined a life of suffering and pain as the next link in a chain now broken. In hindsight, they were the same age, but that didn't matter. He was thousands of years old. He'd lived lifetimes. Sasuke was just a regular 8-year-old. Naruto sat next to him, turning his head and smiling. Hello, Sasuke, he greeted warmly. Sasuke turned to him, his adoration for his brother being replaced with nigh reverence when he met the gaze of the Rinnegan. Sasuke had taken the liberty to study as much as an academy student possibly could about the Rinnegan and the supposed man who first wielded them. Suffice to say, Sasuke nearly worshipped him when he was told that Naruto actually was the sage of six paths who was going to save the world with the help of his beloved older brother Sennin-sama. Sasuke bowed, using the way his brother addressed the holy warrior. Naruto just chuckled. Are you going to watch our spar, Sasuke asked. When the boy nodded his head vigorously, he continued, watch closely. Okay, your brother is fast and clever. If you take your eyes away for even a second you'll miss something, he warned. Sasuke smiled and nodded again, ready to give his entire attention to the daily spar. Itachi exhaled deeply, turning to Naruto in a familiar stance. Getting the message, the blonde made his way to the awaiting Uchiha, taking his own stance. The two did battle. Naruto rushed Itachi, tackling him to the ground and thrusting a single fist at the young ANBU operative's head before his hand made contact. However, Itachi merely pointed at his friend with his index and middle fingers, only to turn his fingers to point to the left. Naruto followed his fingers, only to be met with an odd sight. He was staring at himself on top of Itachi like there was another set of them. Suddenly the copies turned to look at them and were met with nothing. Naruto blinked. He was now looking to his left as if he had been the copies the entire time. Staring at nothing, he brought his gaze back to the man below him, only to stare at his feet as he was standing like he hadn't moved a single inch since he spoke with Sasuke. Naruto just chuckled, shaking his head. You are quite terrifying, you know that. Naruto said. Itachi was stoic as ever, but the blonde could see the slight curving of his lips, and then Itachi blinked. Naruto no longer by his brother, like he was never there to begin with. Suddenly the colors of the world disappeared, replaced by blacks and grays. A sharp intake of air caused Itachi to face his brother, and that's when he noticed that Sasuke could see the new change of the surroundings as well. Naruto's voice echoed around the surroundings. I was married to the reality bender. Itachi, a chuckle was heard. Genjutsu doesn't even begin to compare to the prowess of illusory ninshu. Itachi remembered his friend speak of this, but to actually bend reality in a specific area was almost too much for his mind to handle. He was witnessing the forerunner of Genjutsu, where the art of tricking the mind originally came from. It was amazing. The little dragon felt two fingers touch his back, and then the colors returned. Apparently Naruto erased his presence from the area, masking everything in shades, and simply walked up to his sparring partner. A single touch was all both Itachi and Naruto ever really needed to end a life. Naruto merely smiled, used to winning their spars. After meeting his parents, he was able to learn the shinobi arts at a startling pace thanks to all the help he was receiving. His smile faded when Itachi burst into crows and two fingers were pushed against his neck. This is my win, Naruto-san, Itachi whispered softly. After spending so much time together, Itachi could now call him by his new name without feeling like he was disrespecting the giver of chakra. It would seem so, friend, he smiled. Itachi was remarkable, a truly frightening shinobi. He knew that he was someone that he would have had difficulty with if they were for some reason on opposing sides. He thanked his luck that they were friends. Would you like the usual reward, he asked. Itachi brought his hand down, allowing Naruto to turn. They bowed slightly to each other, creating the seal of reconciliation, and then walked to the porch where a still stunned Sasuke sat. In his mind, Naruto was either very close to or the Kami, so to see him lose anything to his brother confused him more than anything. Was his knee San really that strong? Even the thought brought a smile to his face. His Aniki was so cool. Of course, Itachi replied. Naruto just smiled. What would you like to learn this time? Naruto simply asked, amused that Itachi accepted stories of his past as a reward for winning their spars. Itachi took a moment to think, sitting down and accepting the tea as Otudo provided for the two shinobi. I think, Itachi began, I would like it if you finished the story of how you first met your wife Tsukuyami Haimi. Looked to his friend. What happened to the demon that slaughtered the village you brought back? Naruto had told him how they first met, but he hadn't explained what happened afterwards. He was curious about what became of the demon. The reborn sage gave a glance at the barely visible moon that would soon surely take the sun's place as he remembered his past, the past of the Rikudo Sennin. The sun was gone, leaving to bless another side of the planet, with its never-ending light. The darkness that followed the absence of the sun was critical. Most of humanity had to flee to their homes, taking solace in whatever candlelight they could, but not them, not the humans who she no longer believed to be human. She was traveling with Hagoromo, and Himura Otsutsuki were the definition of incredible and at times terrifying. It had been a week since the holy soldier summoned the king of hell and commanded him to revive an entire village on his own chakra alone. Resurrection was a power only Kami herself possessed. Her Tsukuyami and the other deities were strictly forbidden and unable to perform such a divine feat, so the fact that a single man, a single human, was able to do what a god could not was as remarkable as it was infuriating. Yama, as he was named, was a seriously scary being, not of divine or demonic origin. He just existed, and not even Kami dared to mess with his crucial work with the judgment of mortal souls. The entire world was based off yin and yang. Too much or too less of either would disrupt the foundation of existence balance. So when she saw his form appear, even if it was just his head, and then felt the stifling chakra, she had never been so terrified in her life. Even his eyes reflected the great priest, like the king of hell no longer looked through his own eyes, but that of the sages. Yes, ever since then Tsukuyami was scared of these men, so why she was still following them even she couldn't understand. It was probably out of some idiotic sense of curiosity, the kind that was most likely unhealthy for her. She just couldn't help it. She wanted to learn more, see more of these mysterious men. How would they deal with this demon they were hunting? She didn't know, but she would very soon see what they would do to the demon, to the one called Jashin, a week in half, and already this renegade deity, who was now little more than a demon to them, had slaughtered so many. Entire villages were massacred and every one revived by the most powerful man to live. Neither Hagoromo nor Himura would stand by his innocence were harmed. That's why the three of them, since the annoying goddess, annoying in Himura's opinion, seemed to outright follow them everywhere they went, were about to confront said waste of life. You've already felt it, right? Nii-san, Himura asked his best friend and twin. Hi, Hagoromo replied. This demon is different. He made a face that showed his outrage. This demon, he was a deity. Tsukuyami looked shocked and went to speak, but was stopped dead in her tracks by an extreme flare of chakra from the holy man. He is the abomination that took Susanu's sanity from him. The goddess froze. He was the one that killed Kusanadaheim. A deep male voice spoke. Kusanadaheim. The voice continued. Now that was such a beautiful woman, it was really a shame to kill her, but then again her screams were like music to my ears. Hagoromo, Himura, and Tsukuyami looked behind them and were greeted by something sinister. A man who was only defined as such because of his deep male-like voice stood at an intimidating 7 feet, his skin as black as the night with white bone-like markings marring his face and parts of his torso. A sick sadistic smile was present on his face, and the aura of pain and suffering almost clung to his blackened skin. You are a foul-tainted creature, Himura spoke as he was the only one unaffected by rage enough for actual speech. You forced my brother's hand to take life, and because of that you will be cleansed from the earth. Suddenly the deity turned demon, clutched at his stomach, a disgusting maniacal laugh escaping his mouth. He began through extreme laughter. You believe yourselves gods, don't you? He laughed harder, and then as fast as the laughter came it ceased. What gives you the notion that you can pass judgment on anyone, especially your better? I am a god, you thieving mortals. I am the very embodiment of pain. I am Jashin. He pointed at the small group of fools, an ugly look of carnage on his face. A goddess who is nothing but your whore, who doesn't even have A domain is all you bring as backup. Are you enough? Hagoromo whispered as he spoke. He brought the might of his presence down upon the world, and the world shook. The sinister creature looked at the god-man he heard so much about and wasn't impressed. Himura, however, lowered his head out of pure instinct, because he knew exactly what his brother could do, what he could become, and even though his humble brother spoke as if they were equals, he knew his place. Hagoromo was scary when he was angry. I find it amusing when you bark orders to the divine human. Jashin continued with reckless abandon, especially for the honor of your whore. He chuckled at his own joke. Why? Tsukuyami suddenly spoke, her whisper of a question just barely reaching their ears. Why did you kill Kushinaotaheim? She now screamed. Because of you, Susanoo went insane. Because of you my brother was killed. She was crying tears of sorrow and rage. Why would you do that to your own kind? Her fists were clenched and her face was twisted in rage again. Jashin just laughed before replying. Susanoo was in my way. The god of pain began. I wanted to bring forth pain on the insolent, and he would have stopped me. He giggled. Susanoo, albeit annoyingly valiant, was powerful in his own right. I couldn't risk taking him on by myself here. He looked at the powerful humans, so I made them do it. He chuckled. Thanks for that. By the way, Amira looked the foolish renegade deity in the eyes, pale eyes meeting red orbs, trying to remember the god's face, because after what he just said. Hagoromo let loose his restraint, and the ground on which they stood cracked, large chunks starting to float into the air from the mighty pressure. There wouldn't be anything left of him. The eyes of God the Renegade with 9 tomo sitting on its rings gazed at Himura, and within that gaze Himura knew what was being asked of him. The wielder of the Byakugan looked back at the now demon of pain, and smirked. You should start begging whatever god or devil you worship for mercy. Suddenly Himura's chakra flared, the enormity of it surprising Tsukuyami, and the veins in and around his eyes bulged. Because you won't find anything of the sort from us, Jashin snarled, flaring his own sinister tainted chakra, and defiance come with it. Then he roared. He was the embodiment of pain. These mere men could not scare him. The three rushed each other, and Tsukuyami numbly watched a battle of gods. The men who killed her brother fighting for his honor, for his sacrifice. She wasn't numb because of the battle or even the reasoning for the battle, but because of what she saw in the eyes of Hagoromo. When had he gained the Rinne Sharingan? Since when did he share the same eyes as Kami? It was almost pitiful how little of a chance Jashin actually had. After the initial clash, the foul being was pushed back with unrelenting force. He was beaten, bloodied, and bruised the entire time. However, he cried in ecstasy. The sick bastard was enjoying the pain, realizing that death could not come of pain. Hagoromo silently ordered his brother to bring forth his ultimate technique. Himura was a powerful seal master, even better at the complicated art than his brother. His most powerful technique came in the form of his tattooed left arm, a sealing formula the likes of which were so complicated and detailed that no one other than him could even begin to comprehend. Himura lifted the long white sleeve of his kimono, revealing the tattoo to the world. That's when Jashin's eyes widened, and he no longer cried in joy but began to scream in fear. Tsukuyami finally allowed herself to take her eyes off the holy sage, as he was the more dominant one in the fight, and glanced at his brother. When she glimpsed at his left arm, she nearly fell to her knees, her breath leaving her. Everyone present knew what the sealing array truly was. Himura had somehow learned Kami's true name and then carved it into his left arm in such a manner that would allow him to the younger of the immortal men. Flared the chakra in his left arm, the yin chakra leaking out, encasing his left arm in a blue flame. The black crescent moon-shaped symbol on his palm seemed to bulge as he spoke his next words, pointing the left arm, ablaze with blue flames, at their enemy. Come forth and smite the wicked. A large portal-like tear opened in the air next to him, and he slid his arm into it. Besides Jashin, another larger tear opened, seal of divine wrath, and from the tear the arm of Kami emerged, gripping the deity-turned-demon, successfully trapping him. Tsukuyami was now shaking. She had truly underestimated this man. She had seen the feats of his brother, of the priest of legend, and completely ignored him. She hadn't seen him as someone of such power, but with this act of seemingly bending Kami to his will, it was impossible. You cannot kill pain, Jashin shouted at the top of his lungs, fear evident in his tone. You cannot kill me. I am balance. Without me. He was about to go on about how he maintained the balance, but was cut off by Hagoromo. I won't kill you, Jashin. He spoke, his voice deathly silent. Jashin just smirked, feeling quite smug at the man's confession of weakness. No, that's too good for a vile cretin like you. His eyes snapped onto him, and Jashin felt something he was not familiar with. Sheer terror. You shall face my newest technique, Hagoromo continued. I created it just for you. After all, the chakra in his eyes built up to the point they bled, and the Rikudo Sennin called forth the great storm of summer. Tsukuyami actually fell to her knees this time, her shaking body going completely still, tears falling from her face. Anew, a great construct of chakra surged around him, taking the form of a skeletal creature, before gaining muscle and skin, and then a thick pure white cloak that covered its entire face and body. Susanoo Amira turned to Tsukuyomi. We were able to save a piece of his soul. He began. Nissan took that fragment and gave it life. He smiled when their eyes met, gave it purpose. Susanoo can find redemption through those eyes. One of the warrior's 4 hands rose, a white gourd materializing within it similar to a sake jar. Suddenly the gourd popped open and a white fiery substance came forth, taking the shape of an ethereal blade. Wither away for all eternity. In the world of drunken dreams, Hagoromo drove the blade through Jashin, the demon of pain. You can't get rid of me, human. Jashin snarled. I will live on through my following. The sage slowly began to pull the blade back, the demon's black tainted form following suit. I'm already worshipped. Those who embrace me will be immortal, and they will be many. As he was completely pulled into the gourd, his last words rang out in the destroyed surroundings. Pain will forever exist. And then silence. What was that? Tsukuyomi asked, letting his technique fall. Amira decided to answer the Tatsuka no Tsurugi. He began. It's a variant of my Kusanagi no Tsurugi. He put his hand on the hilt of the blade on his hip. It seals whatever it pierces into an eternal drunken dream. He then looked at his brother, who had a faraway look in his eyes. Stepping closer to him, he put a comforting hand on Hagoromo's shoulder. It's over, Nii-san. He smiled. You delivered justice to Susanoo. He is redeemed. Hagoromo nodded, allowing he with the ability to help by all means fade away. He turned to his brother and gave a small smile. Thank you, he said. Amira was always there to pull him out of his own thoughts. He didn't think he could fight the good fight without his brother by his side. He was so much more than just his brother. He was his friend, his partner, his blood. With a sudden blur of motion, Hagoromo was tackled to the ground. He felt arms wrap around his body, and when he saw the blonde hair against his chest, he knew what was happening. Thank you, Tsukuyomi whispered shakily. Thank you. She repeated those 2 words over and over again. Tears still ran down her cheeks, but these were tears of joy. Susanoo was still alive. Do you miss him? Itachi suddenly asked. Your brother? I mean, Naruto smiled, his expression that of yearning. I miss the both of them, he said. Tsukuyomi was my wife, my love. He closed his eyes. I could spend eternity holding that woman. He then opened his eyes, looking at the little dragon and Amira. Was he paused, taking the moment to think. He was my other half. He finally said, we shaped this world together, we traveled together, ate together, and fought together. Everything. He was my brother, my best friend, and most importantly, he kept me on the right path. Itachi gave a questioning look. Kept you on the right path? He asked curiously. Naruto nodded. My son Azura showed me something. He began. He showed me that through cooperation and love, one could truly become strong. I saw a new possibility in the way he lived. I decided that I would leave humanity and let them work together to attain the love and understanding that my son had found. He touched his stomach. I split the jubi into 9 pieces and gave names to each fragment. He then sighed. I realized that I knew this all along. I knew that cooperation was what kept me safe from hubris. I knew that my brother kept me from going down that path. He looked back to the sky. So yes, I miss him. He was my light. He felt something gently pull him, and a force he was somewhat familiar with slowly ushered him, and he knew what was going on. And when he felt him, he knew what he had to do. He wasn't happy in the pure world. She wasn't there, neither was he. He chose to go there to watch over them, but now he knew there was something else, something more that had to be done. If he was back then, there had to be a reason, and he would not let him do it alone. He had promised, sworn to walk the righteous path with him for as long as he had to. His life ended, but apparently the mission had not. He knew nothing of the world, not bothering to observe it since his departure. He knew that if he looked, he'd see her there all alone, so he let the force guide him, and he felt something he hadn't in 1,000 years. He was excited. He was going to see his brother again. He was going to see his brother's children again, and hopefully he was going to see her again. He didn't even question what was happening. He knew there wasn't anyone foolish enough to fool with him, not after what he'd shown the world, what he accomplished with his brother, so he let it happen. Excitement filling his mind. He had to find his brother. His second coming cometh. Huginiji's eyes snapped open. The Byakugan activated. He smirked